Good day, students. Welcome back. Today, our story is called Abraham Lincoln. And you guys probably already know he was one of our presidents, but today we'll be learning a little bit more about him. Today's vocabulary words: candidates are people who are chosen to run or compete against others for an office, prize, or honor. Example: the candidates for president talked about why they would be the best person for the job. Our second word: debates. Discussions involving two sides or arguments. Larry liked his social studies class because his teacher allowed debates, helping students to understand the two sides of an argument. Our next word is the word expand. Expand means to spread out, to become greater in size. The balloon began to expand as Mandy blew into it. Our fourth word is government. Government is a group of people who help lead a country. People sometimes disagree with decisions made by the government. And our last word is politicians. Politicians are people involved in the activities of a government. The politicians gave speeches on the importance of education in their communities. Today's read aloud takes place many years ago after Abraham Lincoln was a young boy reading by the fire, but a few years before he was trying to get elected President of the United States. Our read aloud describes the period of the time Abraham Lincoln was trying to get elected to be one of two senators from the state of Illinois. Every state in the United States elects two senators to send to Washington, D.C. The senators of each state represent the people in their state in the Senate. The Senate is part of Congress, the part of the central government of the United States that makes the laws for the entire country. In this read aloud, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas are competing with one another to become one of the senators from Illinois. To do this, they travel around the state of Illinois giving speeches about what each would do if he gets elected and debating each other, or in other words, discussing their differences in public. One of Lincoln's and Douglas's major difference is what each would do about slavery. So in today's read aloud begins with two men from Illinois who are friends. One of the men, named Frank, is a farmer, and the other, named Tom, lives and works in town. They have come to the town of Alton, Illinois to hear Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas debate on one another so that they can decide who to vote for in the next Senate election. A newspaper owner named William Foote is also attending the debate so he can write about it in his newspaper. Slavery is a big part of the debate. Today you're going to listen carefully to see if you can figure out what the disagreement is about and what Tom and the townspeople and Frank the farmer think. It was a cold morning in the year 1850 in a town called Alton in Illinois. Workers were putting the finishing touches on a wooden platform in front of a crowd at City Hall. A sharp cold breeze rustled through the trees, sending flowers of crisp red and yellow leaves fluttering through the air. Two of these men in the crowd were old friends. They had not seen each other for a long time. One was a farmer. He was dusty after driving his horse and buggy all the way to town on dirt roads. The other man lived in town. He was dressed in a clean gray suit. "Good to see you, Frank. How is your farm doing, and how was the corn crop this year?" "Oh, it could have been better. The rains came a little late, but it was good enough, I think. I suppose," Frank said, brushing dust from his jacket. He looked around at the faces in the crowd. "You know, Tom, I suppose it has been a lot longer than I thought since I've been to town, because I hardly recognize a single face in this crowd." "That's because most of these people are not from around here," Tom said. "I was just talking to a man from Kentucky, and I met others who said they had crossed the river from Missouri this morning. It seems odd to me that so many people are so eager to come and listen to two politicians from Illinois. There is nothing strange about it, said another man who was standing nearby. Forgive me for interrupting, but I could not help but overhearing your conversation. I'm William Foote, owner of the Daily Pentagraph newspaper, out of Bloomington. I'll tell you, gentlemen, these two politicians are going to talk about a problem that impacts our entire country, from here to Boston all the way to Texas. That is why people from outside Illinois are so interested in what they have to say. Well, I'll tell you what I think, Mr. Foote, said Tom. The problem is not slavery. The problem is that the government wants to tell people how to live their lives. The fact of the matter is that the people should have the right to decide for themselves whether slavery would be allowed in their state or allowed to expand to new states. We don't need politicians in Washington, D.C. telling us what's best for folks in Missouri and Kansas and Texas or Illinois, for that matter. That's not how Mr. Lincoln sees things, Mr. Foote. Lincoln says that he does not see how the United States can survive if half the country thinks slavery is wrong and half the country think it's right. We will see about that, said Tom. Our nation and its government have survived since July 4th, 1776, and slavery has been there all along. And we will be all fine as long as the government quits trying to tell everyone how to live their lives. Don't you agree, Frank? So in this story, Tom believes that slavery is acceptable if the people of the states say it's legal or allowed by the law. Frank thought for a minute and rubbed his chin. Honestly, I'm not really sure, Tom. I think this Lincoln fellow might have a good point when he says that slavery is tearing our country apart. But what do I know? That is why I have come here today to try and get a better understanding. Well, you will not be disappointed, said Mr. Foote. I have been to each of their 6 previous debates, this one being the 7th and last before the Senate elections next month, and I can tell you that you will not find 2 men who disagree more on the issue of whether slavery should be allowed to expand. Should slavery be allowed to expand to new states? That was the true heart of the debate. In 1858, when he was running for the Senate, Abraham Lincoln said he just wanted to stop slavery from spreading to new areas of the country in the West. In other words, Lincoln did not support abolishing or ending slavery where it already existed in the South. At that time, the United States was made up of North, where slavery was illegal or not allowed by law, and the South, where slavery was legal or allowed by the law. The United States was only just beginning to grow into a bigger country, spreading west across the Mississippi River. That wide and mighty river, flowing from Minnesota all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, ran right past the town of Alton. Just across the river was the state of Missouri, which had only been a state since 1821. Slavery was illegal in Missouri, as it was in the nearby state of Kentucky, but slavery was illegal in Illinois. There was a lot of land beyond Missouri, but there were not many states, at least not yet. A huge portion of that land was still divided into territories, regions that were organized with a government of their own, but were not yet a state or states under the national government. The Kansas Territory was an example. Lots of people were moving west to settle in Kansas, and it was on its way to becoming a new state. The people of Kansas would be able to vote on whether or not to allow slavery to expand to their new states. However, the people in Kansas were divided on the issue of slavery. They were so divided, in fact, that the Kansas Territory was known for its severe fighting over whether slavery should be allowed. At last, the two candidates, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, appeared on the stage. The crowd applauded and then settled down to listen to the debate. Both men had become rather famous over the past few months, not just in Illinois and surrounding states, but all over the country. The Lincoln-Douglas debates had been covered in the newspaper as far as Boston, New York, and Atlanta, for those two men represented two very different sides of the slavery issue. Stephen Douglas was a short, plump man and a great speaker. He believed, as did Tom from early in the Read Aloud, that the problem of slavery should be solved by each state and not by the U.S. government. In other words, each state should decide whether to make slavery legal or illegal, and that the United States government should have no say over this issue. Lincoln, on the other hand, thought the U.S. government had a right to prevent the spread of slavery to new parts of the country. The people of the South, especially those who supported slavery, did not like Lincoln for his belief in the power of the United States government over the power of the states. They worried that one day the U.S. government might try to tell the South what to do, especially that the government might tell them to abolish slavery. Lincoln had a reputation of being a powerful and highly intelligent man. He was born on a Kentucky farm, but moved to Indiana and then to Illinois, where he was raised in a one-room cabin. Young Lincoln spent his days working on the farm. He only went to school for a year or two as a child. Nevertheless, he became what is known as self-educated. He read everything he could get his hands on, and by the time he was an adult, he had more knowledge than most people who attended schools for many years. Lincoln eventually taught himself about law, and he became a well-known lawyer in Illinois. Despite his reputation for strength and intelligence and his uncommonly tall, thin body, people were always surprised when Lincoln opened his mouth. Lincoln had a high-pitched, squeaky voice, not the sort of voice people expected to hear, but it was always worthwhile to hear what he had to say. "What is it that we hold most dear among us?" Lincoln asked the crowd that day in Alton. "It is our own freedom and wealth. And what has ever threatened our freedom and wealth except this institution of slavery? If this be true, how will we improve things by expanding slavery, by spreading it out and making it bigger?" How, Lincoln asked, could America continue to be one united nation if it allowed slavery to spread to new states? Mr. Foote, the newspaper man, looked around at the faces in the crowd, and he could tell that Lincoln was winning the debate. More people liked what he had to say. Even those who were not against slavery or did not think that it was wrong would have a hard time trying to prove that it was not tearing the country apart. In an earlier speech, Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." In other words, could a country continue when its citizens held such different opinions about what was right and wrong? As it turned out, Stephen Douglas was a truly powerful politician. He ended up winning the Senate seat, but Abraham Lincoln had definitely brought attention to himself. These two men met again 2 years later as both campaigned to become president of the United States. That race had a very different ending. It is now time for our questions. Question 1, what kinds of things did Lincoln do as an adult? Question 2, what did Lincoln do as a child that helped him prepare to become a lawyer and debater? Question 3, why did people come from several states and territories to hear the Lincoln-Douglas debates? Question 4, how did Lincoln feel about slavery? 5. If you had been at this Lincoln Douglas debate and met Lincoln, what would you have said to him or asked him?